now we'll switch over to Brendan and toss the ball to you.
Cool, thank you.
Are we making things worse? What a great
Yeah, short answer, we sure are. So thank you for letting me get on a soapbox or two in front of you for a few minutes here. I think we spent a lot of time in this conference specifically talking about change management and fair data over the last couple of years. And I think you just saw a really good example of kind of the people side coming into the process side. But as a vendor, there's also a software side, and then there's also the people at the vendor side. And I'm going to just collectively throw all the ELN vendors on for messing this last one up. And hopefully you'll have some fun with me taking shots at ourselves and the other vendors, because I think this is a really important part of the cycle that isn't talked about as much. So when we started SciNote, we started with this simple premise that science is organized knowledge. The problem is it's organized, oh, we're missing some pictures down there. There's a paper notebook under these two on this slide, and it looks about the same time as Miss Curie was doing it now. So we are organizing this data in the same way, and we have for a couple hundred years. We're still pretty much going to the actual notebook first. They're there. Maybe there's an animation there, sorry. These bottom two look a little bit similar. The top two look a little bit similar too. It's gotten a lot fancier. The problem is that the bottom one hasn't got fancier, and I don't think we're really respecting the other stuff that changes. So there are a lot of people problems that cause data loss, but if the software is introduced with walls, with impermeable membranes, there's also data loss from the software too. So this just compounds as science is accelerating, and this middle one, just every time I see the statistic, it like makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Like over half of studies can't be verified. This means like this is just waste, so much waste in all of our collective R&D pipelines. So this is staggering, and I maybe even think the 17% is actually understated if the second number is true. So I think part of this is actually hubris. I think the software vendors are driven by their commercial drive to be one thing to everything. And I think that this is actually not in service of our users, because we, especially as ELNs, are responsible for one of only a couple entrants into the system that's supposed to be fair. There's human-generated data, there's system-generated data, there's machine-generated data. That place has to go somewhere. You guys talked about a hub. There could be a software version of this hub, but just like the people, if this hub doesn't play nicely with all of the spokes, it maybe even is worse than not having that hub at all. All three of these pieces playing together, trying to respect some of these blurry boundaries on this picture here. Some of these letters I still don't even know since I joined SciNote. All of these systems are trending into a place for R&D scientists to do their work. We're also coming to you as a pharma or a biotechnology, and I think the other place of hubris that we have is that we're still in this mindset that ELN vendors and LIMS vendors are fighting each other. What we're fighting over historically is being the system of record. And what's totally insane to me is that when we go to a Pfizer, they already have one. And I mean they already have an ELN or 6, they already have a LIMS or 6, they also already have a system of record. So we could say, instead of, hey, you have to use ours, you have to use only ours, and, or else, maybe even, in addition to that, we could say, how can we help you guys wrangle some of this data? How can we make less stuff fall out? Can we take some of these barriers down and say, as we pass one data to one of these words to another one of these words, maybe it's in the same format, so that all of us know what data we're getting from each other and what we're passing it back. This ecosystem inside the lab can't be done by one vendor. And for some reason, we all are telling you guys, yes, you can, and that one is us. So let me tell you, no, we can't. And everyone who's telling you that is nuts at best, hubris at worst. No, we can't. This doesn't serve science. This doesn't serve your R&D pipelines. Vendors playing together maybe don't have all, we could do a grid, right? The little graph between all of these. And every one of those is a place for the hub to fall apart. If everyone's fighting to be the hub, that means a lot of people are failing to be the hub. And in those three, human-generated, system-generated, machine data, we have the privilege as ELN vendors about making it the worst downstream imaginable. So I don't know how many data folks and informaticists are in here. So I think last year there was actually a talk about what happens when you give scientists a data capture system. We're a data capture system. If it's fully unstructured, it's just a mess, to use a polite word, downstream. Big organizations, you have a lot of different lab types, you have a lot of different scientist types, and at some point, there's an analysis and report on the data, and maybe it goes back into a virtuous cycle. This part right here with the unstructured data is tough. So I like to sort of extend fair data and add one more, because actually some of the easiest findable and accessible data might just be plain text, unsecured, on the internet, everyone can use it. That's probably the stuff of nightmares for most of life sciences. So I kind of wish there was an S at the end for secure. But with that caveat, everyone's talking about fair. And I piloted about 75 puns for this, but I settled on the air gap. I think ELN and LIMS vendors are actually making these three in the middle worse by how we approach the market. Not just our actual product, I'm talking about that fourth category, the people at the vendors and our go-to-market is actually introducing more froth, more silos, less data sharing, less fair. The I in fair is interoperable. Most of these vendors don't have an API or a partner ecosystem. I mean, I don't even have words for that one. All three of these things can be answered in what we're doing. And this has artifacts in your product, and it also has artifacts in your go-to-market. So what I'm talking about more specifically here about being accessible is, are you building things that meet the scientists where they are? Are you building things where the organization is in your product? Do you have APIs first? Do you have more points of entry? What if they're in a clean room? They need voice entry to their ELN. They can't use paper. That's cool. That's actually a really good entry point for ELN. They have to use some kind of technology, but if you don't have this input, this is dead before it starts. I talked about taking a shape from one of those pictures in the flask to one of the others, so from a LIMS vendor to an ELM or back. Is there any agreement on what that data should look like? Are there any kind of a couple API endpoints that all of us share so that we can play nicely with each other? Unfortunately, I think most of you know, because of this rhetoric that it has to be ours and it has to be this platform that solves all of your pain. Well, if all of the vendors are saying this, we're either all wrong or maybe a couple of us are right, but I think maybe you're getting my drift here. I think maybe it's the former. For interoperability, I already talked about APIs, but there's this resistance to sharing. And I think that one of the saddest parts about being a vendor in this dynamic is that we're not even mimicking how science is done and how science is taught. Science itself is collaborative, but then the software built to serve it isn't. I think this is a disconnect that makes me vibrate a little bit. So if you're taking a piece of software to an enterprise, to a lab of consequence, to a large company, you're going to have to teach people how to use the software. You're going to have good customer support. You're going to have to know that they already have 5 or 6 ELNs. One of our largest customers, Agilent, built their own, then chose ours after that. That's okay. They have very professional users who are very educated, very opinionated, it's okay, me too, who work there. Contractors can use different power tools than other contractors. Why do scientists have to use the same ELN or the same LIMS in every single thing because somebody else said so? No, they went to school for a really long time. We should be building professional tools for professional users and have the ego, if they don't choose ours, to be okay. Others will. It's uncommon view. Also, knowing that that hub and the spoke, if you follow me, that we can't do all of it, you guys are asking us for all of it. So where do we fill in the rest of the picture? We can fill in the rest of the picture with friends. If the vendors are willing to play with each other and actually have APIs, have partner ecosystems, maybe learn a little bit about the other software, maybe say, hey, there's a vendor that might start with B that you guys know, really good for cell and life bio and top pharma. I promise I wouldn't say their name, but I think you know who I mean. Maybe if it's not that type, that's okay. If you're that type of lab, you should use them. If you're biotech, maybe you should use us. Both of us should have the fortitude for this because we can't be everything for everyone. And no one in our ecosystem is served if we try to do this. Reusability is a little bit tricky because of security, as I mentioned. But we don't have any virtuous cycles of workflows in the pipeline if we can't actually survive planning an experiment, running the experiment, experimenting the experiment, if you get the A, analyzing it, reporting it, back into planning, and off we go. We have this nice little pair loop over and over and over. But we have to have a couple vendors in this loop, too. We also have labs where we have biologists and biochemists and chemists. and bioinformaticians, and maybe an analyst or a data scientist in the business unit. All of these people are looking into the same data. Are we being fair? Maybe a second pun. Are we being fair to it as it goes down the line? Are we actually passing nice data forward? This is the hardest to do for ELNs because of the openness, which is important for R&D, but we have this challenge. And I think that we have sort of lost this challenge, which is to provide the most flexible possible solution because our users, and then also not have that answer be maximally flexible because the business unit will have a fit if we do this. So this balance is really, really hard, but I think it's also paramount, and it's what our users are asking for. So if I haven't stated this clearly enough for everybody, I think that closed vendors make science worse. It is actually our mission to power science and make science better. I believe in some form it is actually the mission of every one else of these vendors I'm picking on, and maybe I can get away with it because we are one. But I honestly believe that closed vendors are making science worse, and we're here to make science better. So I have a challenge for everybody in the room, and it has a couple of heads. One of them, literally, us, like this whole group, because we can talk about the people side of this, and we can talk about the software side of it. But I also mean the vendors, because we don't have a partner ecosystem without actually having partners. We can't discuss the things about sharing if we're not talking about it. And as an outsider, I come to the industry from healthcare IT, not from life sciences. It blows my mind that we're not willing to go into a Pfizer or an Amgen as a squad of 4 vendors, because that's the picture that actually takes care of their users. Let's do that. Let's talk about that. For you as users, there's definitely things in your lab that we don't solve. There's definitely things in your lab that the folks who tell you they do everything don't solve. Help us understand what those things are. It's our responsibility to either fill those gaps with our own product, our own services, or partners. And if we're not talking about it, it's not going to get any better. We've built a community, we think, of consequence, of people who share this. I think maybe our weakest thing as SciNote has been we haven't been telling anybody what we've been building and why. Hopefully this was a little bit insightful of what we're trying to do, and a couple folks agree that our approach is at least the right kind of crazy. And with that, I'll pass this back. Thank you.
Very good.